I woke up at 5:30 a.m. on the morning of Christmas Eve, and the 4 cars usually parked in my driveway were gone. 17 family members had sneaked out in the middle of the night. No phone call, no text. Just a group chat titled, Operation Ditch Grandma. They had only forgotten one tiny detail. The $18,500 vacation rental was booked under my name. I opened my laptop and canceled everything. By 6:30 a.m., I had 103 missed calls. It was 5:30 a.m. on December 24th when a heavy, oppressive silence woke me. There were no footsteps creaking on the old hardwood floors, no muffled laughter drifting from the guest rooms. I got out of bed, pulled my robe a little tighter around myself, and walked over to the window. The fresh snow in the driveway had been churned up by thick tire tracks. The 4 cars that had been packed tightly together just last night were completely gone. My son, Connor, my daughter-in-law Megan, and her entire 15-person extended family had vanished. 17 people had quietly packed up and hit the road in the dead of night. Without me, I walked slowly down the stairs. My heart wasn't racing. If anything, it felt like it was beating calmer and slower than usual. The kitchen smelled of cold coffee and frantic rushing. Half-empty mugs were scattered across the dark granite island, sitting right next to half-eaten bagels. They had helped themselves to the groceries I had exhausted myself buying yesterday, leaving nothing but dirty dishes in their wake. Suddenly, a screen lit up on the counter. It was Megan's old tablet, the one she usually kept around for recipes. A notification popped up. The group chat name read, Operation Ditch Grandma. My hand didn't even shake as I swiped open the screen. Reading the messages from the past few hours was like reading a trashy novel. We'll sneak out around 4 a.m. If she comes with us, she's just going to kill the vibe again, Megan had written. One of her cousins replied, whatever. As long as her credit card is on file for the lodge, who cares? My own son had simply replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I just stared at the words. Just last night. I had stayed up late brewing a special ginger tea for Megan's mother and packing a travel first aid kit for the kids. They had happily soaked up all my care and attention while secretly plotting their escape. For a split second, an old habit flared up the urge to call them to apologize, to ask if I could catch a flight and meet them there. But that impulse died instantly. I wasn't sad. I felt a strange, almost eerie sense of total clarity. I poured the rest of the cold coffee down the drain. My eyes landed on the booking confirmation for the luxury lodge in Aspen. It was a receipt for $18,500 paid in full from my checking account. I sat down at the massive solid oak dining table that my late husband and I had bought 20 years ago. In front of me sat the printed folder with all the travel documents. $18,500. That was the price tag for the exclusive mountain lodge that Megan absolutely insisted her extended family needed. 2 weeks of total luxury, complete with a private chef and a spa. She had whined for weeks about how Connor's salary couldn't cover it, guilt-tripping me about how Christmas is supposed to be all about family. I had finally caved and dipped into my life savings. And now, I was sitting alone in my house while they were speeding toward a vacation that I was paying for. I flipped open my laptop. No hesitation, no tears in my eyes. I pulled up the booking portal. The page loaded quickly, pulling up all the glossy details of the stay. The cancellation policy was strict, but I knew the fine print. Since I was the primary leaseholder on the contract and hadn't checked in yet, I had the right to revoke the booking immediately if I suspected unauthorized use by third parties. I didn't even bother picking up the phone to argue with anyone. I simply clicked the button to cancel. A form popped up. I typed in a very clinical explanation, stating that the group was attempting to arrive without the account holder and that I explicitly prohibited the transfer of any costs for these individuals. With a soft, precise tap of the enter key, I submitted the request. Less than a minute later, my landline rang. It was the lodge's concierge. A polite, albeit slightly confused voice asked to confirm the request. I calmly verified my identity. Yes, that is correct. I am canceling the entire reservation, including all add-on services. Please do not grant the arriving party access to the property under my name. The concierge processed the request. The refund minus a small processing fee would hit my card in a few days. I closed the laptop. It wasn't even 6 o'clock in the morning yet. The silence in the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt expansive and liberating. I pictured those 17 people packed into their overloaded SUVs cruising down the interstate, laughing and congratulating themselves on having successfully tricked me. They had no idea that their destination had just been wiped off the map. After closing the laptop, I headed upstairs. My house was big, maybe a little too big for one person, but it was mine and it was paid off. The second floor was essentially Connor and Megan's wing. They had been living with me rent-free for 3 years, supposedly to save up for a down payment on a house of their own. Yet somehow, all that saved money materialized into stacks of designer bags and the latest electronics. I didn't even open the door to their living area. I didn't need to see any more of their mess. I went into my own bedroom and pulled a small carry-on out of the closet. I wasn't packing for a whole family this time. I was just packing for me. Some comfortable clothes, a good book I'd been meaning to read for months, and my warm winter boots. It took me less than 15 minutes. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. A quiet, cozy bed and breakfast right on the coast of Maine, miles away from ski slopes and snowstorms. I gave them a call and booked the last available single room. The receptionist on the other end sounded genuinely thrilled to have me. Back down in the kitchen, I started methodically cleaning up. I tossed the half-eaten bagels into the compost, loaded the mugs into the dishwasher, and wiped the crumbs off the granite. Every swipe of the sponge felt like shedding an old skin. For years, I had been the invisible help. I was the one who folded the laundry, paid the bills on time, and kept track of everyone's appointments. They had downgraded me to the house's infrastructure. But the thing about infrastructure is you can shut it off. I scribbled a quick note and left it on the spotless kitchen island. No guilt trips, no dramatic monologues. Just a straightforward heads up. The cleaning lady comes on Tuesday. The house is locked. Then I put on my winter coat, grabbed my bag, and stepped out into the crisp, freezing morning air. I double-locked the front door. The keys felt heavy and secure in my pocket. My car was sitting in the garage ready to go. When I started the engine, I didn't look back at the house once. The long drive up the coast was waiting for me. It was 6:30 a.m. when my phone vibrated for the first time. I was just merging onto an almost completely empty interstate heading north. A quick glance at the screen on the passenger seat told me everything I needed to know Megan. I didn't answer. I flipped the phone to silent and focused on the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers clearing away the morning mist. For the next few hours, my screen lit up relentlessly. It was a silent storm of incoming calls and frantic texts. Around 9 o'clock, I pulled into a rest stop to grab a cup of tea. I picked up my phone. The screen displayed 103 missed calls. The names flashed in a frantic, never-ending loop. Megan, Connor, Megan's, Mom, Connor, Megan. They had reached the lodge in Aspen. I opened my text messages feeling absolutely no trace of anxiety. I read them like an impartial observer, as if none of this had anything to do with me. We're at the gate. The code isn't working. Call us right now. was the first text from Megan. 10 minutes later, the guy at the front desk says, "You canceled, reverse the charge right now. My parents are freezing in the car." Then, a text from my son, "Mom, what is this? Seriously, this isn't funny. Megan is crying. You're embarrassing us in front of her whole family. Fix this with the hotel right now." I stared at the screen. Not a single "Where are you?" Not one "Are you safe at home?" All they cared about was the access code and the money. They weren't worried about me. They were just furious that their personal ATM was out of order. I took a sip of my hot tea, feeling the warmth spread comfortably through my chest. If I had gone with them, I'd be standing out in the freezing snow right now, trying to haul luggage for 17 people into a lobby, while Megan complained about the room assignments. Instead, I was sitting in a warm car, entirely at peace. I typed out a single short reply into the Operation Ditch Grandma group chat, which I had taken a picture of on the tablet and texted to myself. I attached the photo of their secret chat log to my message, the exact screenshot where they called me a buzzkill and gloated about using my credit card. Underneath it, I typed one carefully crafted sentence. Operation Ditch Grandma was a resounding success. Good luck finding rooms. I hit send. Then I turned the phone completely off. I held down the power button until the screen went pitch black. No standby mode, no buzzing. Just absolute, beautiful, technological silence. I finished my tea without rushing. I didn't even try to imagine the absolute chaos unfolding outside that lodge. It was no longer my problem how 17 people were going to spontaneously find affordable lodging in an expensive ski resort town on Christmas Eve. They were all adults. They had cars and their own bank accounts. For years, I had taken that responsibility off their shoulders, operating under the misguided belief that financial support equaled love. Today, I finally let go of that illusion. The rest of the drive up to Maine was smooth. When I pulled up to the little inn by early afternoon, the air smelled fresh and deeply salty. A biting wind was blowing off the water, but it felt incredibly cleansing. My room was cozy, overlooking the gray, crashing waves of the Atlantic. There was no giant, overwhelming Christmas tree, no holiday stress, just a quiet restaurant downstairs and a small heated pool. I unpacked my few things, set my toiletries in the bathroom, and changed into some comfortable clothes. That evening, I sat alone at a small table in the dining room. I had a beautiful plate of seared seafood and a glass of dry white wine. Nobody asked me to go fetch the salt. Nobody complained that the food wasn't cooked right. I just quietly watched the other guests, mostly older couples or solo travelers like myself. For a brief second, I thought about the massive, empty house I'd left behind. But it didn't feel like a prison anymore. It was just a building. I spent the next 5 days on the coast, living at a rhythm dictated completely by me. I woke up when my body was done sleeping, not when someone was yelling down the hall for fresh coffee. I took long walks on the beach, bundled up in my heaviest winter coat, letting the freezing ocean wind whip against my face. I sat outside for hours reading my book and drinking hot chocolate from a thermos. My phone stayed off. It was buried deep at the bottom of my duffel bag, forgotten like a useless relic from a past life. I could physically feel a deep-seated tension melting out of my shoulders, a tension that had been building up for years. I had always believed that I had to make myself useful just to earn a spot in my son's life. After my husband passed away, I had treated Connor and eventually Megan like fragile glass sculptures, sweeping every minor inconvenience out of their way. I paid for their car repairs, kept their fridge stocked, and bit my tongue when Megan criticized my taste in furniture. I had pushed my own boundaries back so far that they had basically disappeared. But out here in the quiet, expansive beauty of the coastline, it hit me I hadn't done anything wrong. I had just given way too much. On the fourth day, I walked into town and sat down at a little bakery. I ordered a slice of cake and took a very pragmatic look at my future. I wasn't even 70 yet. I was in great health, I owned a paid-off home, and I had a solid nest egg. I didn't need a sprawling family that only viewed me as a logistics center and a checkbook. I needed peace, and I needed respect. When I packed my bag on the fifth day, I didn't feel relaxed in the traditional spa vacation sense. I felt strong, like I had just finished a grueling but necessary workout. I knew exactly what was waiting for me back home. They were going to be furious. They were going to try to manipulate me with guilt. They were going to play the victims. But my mind was made up. I started the drive home with a clear head and a steady pulse. Playing by their rules was officially over. It was late Tuesday afternoon when I finally turned onto my street. Most of the snow had melted over the past few days, and the wet asphalt was glistening under the streetlights. Even from a distance, I could see the lights blazing on the second floor of my house. Connor's car was parked diagonally across the driveway, sloppy and rushed. I calmly pulled my car into the garage, killed the engine, and grabbed my bag. My heart wasn't racing. I just felt a cold, hard determination. The second I unlocked the front door, I heard heavy, hurried footsteps pounding down the stairs. Connor and Megan were in the hallway before I'd even taken my coat off. Megan looked completely exhausted, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, and her face was pale with absolute fury. "Where have you been?" she snapped without a single ounce of relief that I had made it home safely. "Do you have any idea what you did to us? My parents had to drop thousands of dollars on tiny rooms at some cheap, middle-of-nowhere motel. I neatly hung my coat on a hanger and placed my boots on the rack. I was on vacation, I replied calmly, walking right past them and into the kitchen. I clicked the electric kettle on. Connor followed right on my heels. "Mom, seriously, that was incredibly childish," he said, using that whiny, authoritative tone he'd adopted over the last few years. "You embarrassed us in front of the entire family. You owe Megan's parents compensation for those hotel bills. You can't just treat us like that." I slowly turned around and leaned back against the counter. I looked at my son. He was wearing a sweater I had bought him for his birthday. He was standing in a kitchen I had paid off. "I don't owe anyone a dime," I said quietly, but with a sharp edge that made him shut up instantly. "You guys secretly planned your getaway and explicitly uninvited me. That is absolutely your right. But it is my right to refuse to pay for a vacation I'm not a part of." I reached for my tea mug. The conversation was just getting started. Megan stepped up next to Connor and crossed her arms aggressively. That chat was a joke. A stupid, inside joke between cousins. "You completely lost your mind canceling everything like that. You hung us out to dry on purpose." Her voice was getting shrill. She was trying to dominate the room by being the loudest person in it. The old me would have caved right then and there. I would have tried to smooth things over, maybe even offered to reimburse them for some of the damages just to keep the peace. But this time, I didn't even flinch. "It wasn't a joke, Megan," I replied matter-of-factly. "It was the truth. You wanted a break from me, and I am completely respecting that." I opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder I had prepped before I left. There were no legal documents from a lawyer, no complicated contracts. Just simple, straightforward household expense spreadsheets. I slid the folder onto the kitchen island. "We don't need to argue about the trip anymore. That's a done deal. What we need to talk about is the future of this house." Connor stared at the folder like it was a bomb. "What is this?" he asked nervously. These are the monthly operating costs for the second floor, I explained evenly. Power, water, heating, Wi-Fi. You two have lived here for 3 years without contributing a single cent. I gave you that space so you could save money. Instead, you insult me under my own roof. I pushed the paperwork across the smooth granite toward them. Starting January 1st, you will be covering your own utilities. It comes out to $500 a month. I expect the transfer on the 1st of every month. Megan gasped. You can't do that. We're trying to save for our future. You can't just suddenly start extorting money from your own son. I'm not asking for rent. I corrected her, totally unbothered. I am simply asking you to cover the resources you actually consume. I am no longer your personal bank, and I'm no longer your invisible maid. Connor reached out and tried to grab my hand, but I pulled it back gently but firmly. Mom, please come on. Let's just talk about this reasonably, he pleaded. I shook my head. We are talking reasonably, Connor, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. I stayed quiet and played my part for years. I honestly thought if I just tried hard enough and paid for enough things, you'd actually value me as a part of your life. But you guys just see me as a useful tool. I tapped my index finger on the paperwork. If you can't or won't pay your share of the utilities, you are more than welcome to find your own place. You have 4 weeks to let me know what you decide. Megan's face hardened. Her attempt to control me through intimidation had completely backfired, so she went straight for the nuclear option. If you actually go through with this, she hissed, then we're moving out. But don't come crying to us when you're sitting all by yourself in this massive house. Don't expect us to call. She spun on her heel and stomped up the stairs. The door to the second floor slammed shut so hard the walls shook. Connor stood there helplessly for another second, looking back and forth between me and the folder, before silently following her up. I was left alone in the kitchen. There were no tears stinging my eyes, no heavy weight crushing my chest. Megan's threat of leaving me alone had totally lost its bite. I was already alone when I was cooking for them, paying for them, and being invisible to them. The intense loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't respect you is so much colder than the peaceful silence of an empty house. I grabbed my mug of tea, walked into the living room, and sank into my comfortable couch. Over the next few weeks, the house turned into a silent zone. Connor and Megan barely spoke a word to me. They stopped eating in my kitchen and actively avoided eye contact. By mid-January, I saw them carrying the first set of moving boxes out to the hallway. They had actually gone out and rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town. They honestly thought they were punishing me, that they were teaching me a lesson. They didn't realize they were giving me exactly what I wanted: my space back. Moving day happened on a rainy Saturday morning. Connor silently hauled boxes out to a U-Haul while Megan stared stubbornly straight ahead anytime she had to walk past me. I didn't get in their way. I didn't offer to help lift anything. And I certainly didn't make sandwiches for the moving crew. I just sat at the dining table, reading the morning paper and drinking my coffee. When Connor carried the very last box out, he paused in the doorway. We're leaving now, he said quietly. I just nodded. Leave your key on the console table, I replied calmly. He did, without saying another word. When the front door finally clicked shut and the rumble of the moving truck faded down the street, I walked into the hallway. I picked up the house key Connor had left behind and dropped it into the little catch-all bowl. Then I walked upstairs. The second floor was completely empty. It smelled a little like dust and harsh cleaning spray. Stripped of all their bulky furniture, the rooms looked massive and flooded with natural light. I cranked the windows wide open and let the crisp, freezing winter air blow through the entire floor. It was time for a fresh coat of paint. In the months that followed, my life changed completely. I had the upstairs renovated and turned it into a bright, airy studio where I started painting again, a hobby I had abandoned 20 years ago. The money I was no longer bleeding out to fund my son's lifestyle, I started investing in myself. I booked little weekend getaways, went out to nice dinners with old friends, and fully enjoyed having total control over my own time and my own space. Connor still reaches out every now and then. Short formal phone calls on my birthday or major holidays. I never saw Megan again. I didn't turn into the evil mother-in-law from some cheesy movie. I simply stopped being the comfortable cushion that absorbed all their responsibilities. Sometimes when I'm sitting in my big, quiet house in the evening, I think back to that Christmas Eve morning. I think about those 103 missed calls. And then I smile, switch my phone to silent, and crack open a really good book. Some people only remember you as long as your credit card works. The day I stopped paying for my seat at the family table, I didn't lose them. I just got my house, my peace of mind, and myself back.